I just wanted to say that to say thank you to Justin and to ask you all to welcome Justin where he's going to read from his book. So, Justin, come on out.
I'm going to read a little bit from the book because it's fun to read and it's nice to be read to. It's not going to be very lengthy. And then I want to do just kind of Q&A for the remaining amount of time. So to avoid the awkward moment when I say, are there any questions, and nobody raises their hand, would you please now think of your question? I would be very grateful. All right. The section that I'm going to read from, and again, it's not very long, I guess I'll give it a little bit of introduction. Everybody who's read these books knows that I spend a little bit of time at the beginning of each book in what, for lack of a better term, I will call the here and now. It's not quite this world, but it's a version of this world. And in the first book of the trilogy, that's Amy and Wolgast's story. Oh, there he is. Yes. Just so you know, that's Brad Wolgast right there. There he is. Yeah, say hi to the people, and right in front too. As you know, as Tom pointed out, I lived in Philadelphia for 11 years, which is why it was the last city I destroyed in the first book. Right? Yeah, the very last one. I mean, then I did destroy you, but I waited as long as I could. And I'm a very lazy namer, so there are other people in the room, no doubt, whose names have appeared in these books. I see Meredith over there. I've had the name Meredith in 2 novels, okay? In Summer Guest, there was a Meredith, and there's a Meredith in this one as well. If the Molyneux clan is here, these books are full of Molyneux in multiple books. So, you know, and is Adrian here? Adrian, there he is in the back. This gentleman in the back was my student and then was a very helpful consultant for me on a lot of military stuff because he was in the Army. And I named the minister of propaganda, the evil minister of propaganda at the Homeland after him. And was he torn apart? Yes, he was torn apart, I believe, yes. And he was torn apart. And Adrian was very, very flattered by that, as far as I know. So I only kill my friends with a great deal of love. So anyway, the here and now, the Wolgast, Amy story in the first one, Kittredge, Danny, April, the bus in the second one. And then the third one, the project of the third book, of course, is to show you the Oz behind the curtain, right? Zero Fanning, who you may remember from the first book as the Columbia biochemist, who is infected and survives. He's the only one who survives on the misbegotten expedition to Bolivia. He is brought back, and his infected blood is the basis for, you know, the creation of a race of super predators that eat the North American continent. Good work, guys. When I got to his story, what I decided to do is do something that I hadn't done in any other books. I felt like I'd already done everything I knew how to do, or at least tried to, but I hadn't let anybody just tell their own story. So what I decided to do was to let Fanning just narrate his own story. And of course, he's been, you know, this isn't really a spoiler, but he's been sitting in Grand Central Station for 100 years with nothing to do but read books and sulk. So he's a very interesting narrator, somewhat, you know, wobbly and definitely not 100% reliable. But he's a charismatic and talkative guy with, you know, who's very erudite. He's read a lot. So I really, really enjoyed writing in his voice. And when people ask me, as often happens, this question will probably come up, so I'll just answer it now. People say, which character do you feel you're the most like? And I must tell you that, except for the destroying the world thing, I would say that Fanning is pretty much my alter ego. All right, so I'm just going to read a little bit from his opening section when he starts to talk. Again, some of you who've read a bit of the book, or all of it, know that he's actually telling the story to somebody, to one of the characters that you know. Right? So it's not just that kind of disembodied beaming of one person's mind into the reader's mind. It's actually a told story. There's no glass to go with that. Oh, here it is. All right. This is my Marco Rubio moment. Yeah. That was so awkward. All right. Behind every great hatred is a love story. For I am a man who has known and tasted love. I say a man because that is how I know myself. Look at me, and what do you see? Do I not take the form of a man? Do I not feel as you do, suffer as you do, love as you do, mourn as you do? What is the essence of a man, if not these things? In life, I was a scientist called Fanning. Fanning, Timothy J., holder of the Eloise Armstrong Distinguished Chair in Biochemical Sciences, Columbia University. I was known and respected, a figure of my times. My opinions were sought on many subjects. I walked the hallways of my profession with my head held high. I was a man of connections. I shook hands, kissed cheeks, made friends, took lovers. Fortune and treasure flowed my way. I supped at the flower of the modern world. City apartments, country houses, sleek automobiles, good wine, all of these were things I had. I dined in fine restaurants, slept in upscale hotels. My passport was fat with visas. Thrice I wooed and thrice I wed, and although these unions came to naught, each was, in its final measure, no matter of regret. I worked and rested, danced and wept, hoped and remembered, even from time to time prayed. I lived, in sum, a life. Then, in a jungle in Bolivia, I died. You will know me as Zero. Such is the name that history has bestowed upon me. Zero the destroyer, great devourer of the world. That this history shall never be written is a circumstance of ontological debate. What becomes of the past when there is no man to record it? I died and then was brought to life, the oldest tale there is. I arose from the dead, and what did I behold? I was in a room of the bluest light, pure blue, cerulean blue, the blue the sky would be if it were married to the sea. My arms, legs, even my head were bound. I was a captive in that place. Scattered images lit my mind, flashes of light and color that refused to gather into meaning. My body was humming. That is the only word. I was to learn that I had just emerged from the final stages of my transformation. I had yet to see my body, of course, being inside it. Tim, can you hear me? It was a voice coming from everywhere and nowhere. Was I dead? Was this the voice of God addressing me? Tim, if you can hear me, lift a hand. This did not seem too much for God, for any God, to ask. That's it, Tim. Now the other one. Excellent. Well done, Tim. You know this voice, I said to myself. You are not dead. It is the voice of a human being like you, a man who calls you by name, who says, well done. That's it, Tim. Just breathe. You're doing fine. The nature of my situation was becoming more clear. I had been ill in some manner. Perhaps I had suffered seizures. That would explain the restraints. I could not yet recall the circumstance, how I had come to be in this place. The voice, I thought, was the key. If I could identify its owner, all would be revealed. Tim, I'm going to undo the straps now. I felt a release of pressure. Triggered by some remote mechanism, my bindings had surrendered their hold. Can you sit up, Tim? Can you do that for me? It was also true that whatever my ailment was, the worst had passed. I did not feel ill, quite the contrary. The humming sensation, which originated in my chest, had enlarged to an orchestral whole-body vibrato, as if all the molecules of my anatomy were playing a single note. The sensation was deeply, almost sexually pleasurable. My loins, the tips of my toes, even the roots of my hair, never had I experienced anything so exquisite. A second voice, deeper than the first. Dr. Fanning, I'm Colonel Sykes. Sykes? Did I know a man named Sykes? Can you hear us, Dr. Fanning? Do you know where you are? A hole had opened inside me. Not a hole, a maw. I was hungry, deeply, madly hungry. Mine was the appetite not of a human being, but of an animal. A hunger of claws and teeth, of burrowing in, of soft flesh beneath the jaws and hot juices exploding upon the palate. Tim, you've got us pretty worried in here. Talk to me, buddy. And just like that, the gates of memory opened, releasing a flood. The rainforest, with its steamy air and dense green canopy full of hooting animals. The stickiness of my skin and the swarm of insects around my face. The soldiers scanning the trees with their rifles as we walked, their faces streaked with jungle paint. The statues, man-like figures of monstrous form, warning us away even as they called us forward, summoning us deeper into the heart of that vile place, the bats. They'd come at night, swarming our encampment, bats by the hundreds, the thousands, the 10,000s, a flapping multitude. They blotted out the heavens. They took the sky by storm. The gates of hell had opened, and this was its disgorgement, its black vomitus. They seemed not to fly, but to swim, moving in organized waves like a school of airborne fish. They fell upon us, all wings and teeth and vicious little squeaks of joy. I remembered the shots, the screams. I was in a place of blue light and a voice that knew my name, but in my mind I was running for the river. I saw a woman writhing on the banks. Her name was Claudia. She was one of us. The bats had covered her like a cloak. Imagine it, the horror. Almost no part of her was visible. In truth, my first instinct was to do nothing. I did not possess the heart of a hero, yet sometimes we discover things about ourselves that we never knew. I took 2 great leaps and tackled her, sending the 2 of us plunging into the fetid river. I felt the hot stab of the bat's teeth in the flesh of my arms and neck. The water around us boiled with blood. Such was the bat's fury that even the water did not deter them. They would feed upon us even as they drowned. I locked Claudia's neck in my elbow and dove down, although I knew this would come to nothing. The woman was already dead. I remembered all of these things, and then one more. I remembered a man's face. It hovered above me, framed by jungle sky. I was burning with fever. The air around me throbbed with the din of the helicopter's blades. The man was yelling something. I tried to focus on his mouth. It was alive, he was saying. My friend Jonas Lear was saying, it was alive, it was alive, it was alive. I lifted my head and looked. The room was barren, like a cell. On the wall across from me, a wide, dark window showed my reflection, and I saw what I'd become. I did not rise. I launched. I rocketed across the room and hit the window with a thud. Behind the glass, the 2 men lurched backward, Jonas and the second one, Sykes. Their eyes were wide with fear. I pounded. I roared. I opened my jaws to display my teeth so they would know the measure of my rage. I wanted to kill them. No, not kill. Kill is too dull a word for that which I desired. I wanted to annihilate them. I wanted to tear them limb from limb. I wanted to crack their bones and bury my face in the wet remains. I wanted to reach inside their chests and yank out their hearts and devour the bloody meat as the last stray current twitched the muscle, and I wanted to watch their faces as they died. They were yelling, screaming. I was not what they had bargained for. The glass was bowing, shuddering beneath my blows. A blast of white-hot brightness engulfed the room. I felt as if I'd been shot by 100 arrows. I stumbled backward, fell curling to the floor, a clattering of gears above, and with a bang, the bars fell, sealing me away. Tim, I'm sorry. This was never my intention. Forgive me, forgive me. Perhaps Jonas was sorry. It made no difference. Even then, huddled on the floor in agony, I knew that their advantage was temporary. It held no weight. The walls of my prison could not help but eventually yield to my power. I was the dark flower of mankind, ordained since time's beginning to destroy a world that had no God to love it. I will stop there.
I'm glad you actually chose that section to read from because I didn't want to give any spoilers. So in reading through part 2, The Lover, a couple of times now, that seemed about as rich as anything else in any of the books. And it could have been its own story, its own
Right.
book by itself. And you talk about relating to Fanning and his past and everything, but my question
He's
was
an
how did you-
academic, so am I, you know.
the inspiration for his story,
Yeah.
where did that come from? I mean, it was detailed.
Yeah, it's very detailed. Well, Fanning's narrative, I mean, I always knew the basic connection. Before I even started writing the book, I'd planned things out, and I knew that Fanning and Jonas had a relationship that went way back. And I knew the kind of thing that it was, but not the details. You know, if the world's going to end, it's going to start at Harvard, I think is my feeling about it, having gone there. And, of course, that's the connection. Jonas Lear and Tim Fanning are roommates at Harvard. In fact, they live in my room at Harvard. So, I mean, I was able to use a lot of, in a sense, biographical detail. It's in a sense the most autobiographical thing I've ever written in terms of just material circumstance, right? In terms of where they live, what they do, the social practices of their early friendship. You know, the whole business about being in a final club, and the kid who's kind of the outsider coming to Harvard, and then there are these other people there who seem like they were born there. You know, they've totally figured it out. They're scions of the tribe, in a sense. So all that information, just in some sense it flowed out of my life, and in some sense it just flowed out of my imaginative life for these characters. There is a literary antecedent to this, though, and one guy nailed this in an interview. I raised it first, but then he said, "Oh my God, I was going to ask you the question." And it's the novel *Brideshead Revisited* by Evelyn Waugh that was made into see, this is the funny thing about the Passage Trilogy. It's full of these an apocalyptic vampire trilogy that has a whole chapter as an homage to Mrs. Dalloway. Who ever thought of that, okay? That's the first Lila chapter in the 12, which has the concluding line of the first chapter of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. *Brideshead Revisited* is a novel that I first became acquainted with in college because of the wonderful BBC miniseries. Do people remember that? It was our first experience of quality television in this country, actually. It was. No, I mean, people say it was The Sopranos because television has gotten wonderful, right? I mean, the movies suck and TV's great, okay? And *Brideshead Revisited*, which was a BBC show, and it was on, it came to the United States, I think, in '81 or '82. And then I went and read the novel and loved it, and it's kind of similar shape, and so that was also part of what I was doing. Every part of this trilogy, there's usually some book that's operating in the background, which I don't hide. It's, you know, people who say their books are completely original, I mean, they're just lying. Behind every writer is a really big bookshelf, and you feel certain books over your shoulder at various times more intensely than others. The book that's the major literary antecedent for The Passage has nothing to do with the apocalypse. It has nothing to do with horror. It has nothing to do with monsters. It's *Lonesome Dove* by Larry McMurtry, right? Which is it's a Western road novel, which is a lot of what The Passage actually is. It's a bunch of people who've lived in total isolation their whole lives, traveling across a dangerous, sublime West, which is sort of beyond their imagination, and experiencing it for the first time, which is one of the sort of the most fundamental themes in all American writing, is the first encounter with the American wilderness. So I got off track a little bit and kind of enlarged the question, but anyway, that's where Fanning's story comes from. It's full of, I'll tell you something. I was giving a reading in Seattle, and you know, there's Liz's house. You've read the section, Liz's house in Massachusetts, right? A woman came up to me and said, "That's Beth Healy's house that we trashed at graduation." And I was like, "Yes, that is," right? Yeah, please tell her I said hi, you know. Why invent, you know, when you've got stuff that's just there for the taking?
I love your books, and
Thank you.
anyone who I meet who has read them similarly is totally in love. But then I always get the question, so my husband, who also had you at LaSalle, will say, "Oh, what is that book that you're reading?" And I just have to, you know, the short elevator pitch is, well, it's a post-apocalyptic book about vampires.
Right, sure, yeah.
And then he's like, "Well, I don't want to read another vampire book." So
yeah.
how do you describe it?
I don't.
No.
No, it's been a problem, I must tell you. First of all, I started this trilogy before the whole mid-2000s vampire thing. You know that thing? You know those books, right? Which I have not read. I'm not the demographic, okay? These are romance novels for young women, and God bless. What's good for the goose, but not my cup of tea. So there wasn't a kind of like stain of on the project at that point, and they're very difficult books to describe because they are the kitchen sink. I put absolutely everything I could think of in these books. I don't think of them as horror. I won the Goodreads Horror Award, right? I was like, okay, right? And people say, who's your favorite horror writer? And I always say, Edgar Allan Poe, right? I'd say the sort of apocalyptic material in the books is in some ways I did read a ton of end of the world books as a young man because I was born in 1962, and between 1962 and 1989, it seemed not possible, but indeed likely, that with about 40 minutes warning, we'd all get incinerated, right? That's really true. The world is so much safer than it was. People are, there's things to worry about, but nothing like that. Nothing like 10,000 Soviet warheads pointed at 10,000 American nuclear warheads. And as a way of kind of dealing with those anxieties, I read a lot of those books. There's some real touchstones, ones people know, like Alas Babylon is a pretty famous one, On the Beach. I read a lot of end of the world literature, so that was definitely operating in the background. But, they are difficult books to describe, and they're all very different. The Passage is a road novel. The 12 is a spy novel, really. I was thinking of 1984. It's very much about insurgency and occupation. I was really thinking about Iraq too. And you have a guy who's an Iraqi war veteran in the book, a wounded vet. And then in the third book is both coming of age in terms of the Fanning narrative, right? It's a very much straight up coming of age, sort of class-based novel. And then it's a war novel. So they're all different. So I need a lot of elevators to explain this, basically. There's no one elevator pitch. For Hollywood, I think there was, but not as far as I'm concerned.
So I know, what the Philly influence is. You saved us for last, and then
I
killed us.
did,
But
yeah.
I was wondering, you've now had Texas. You've been in Texas for a long time, so I was wondering if there's a Texas influence on your writing.
The three major locations in the novels are Southern California, where I lived. Philadelphia gets that kind of pivot piece, the last city where I lived. And then a lot of the book takes place in Texas with a very specific Texas geography. I've now lived in Texas longer than I lived in Philadelphia. I was there for 11 years. I've been in Texas, I guess, going on 13, right about 13 years. And there's a lot of Texasness. Once they find the expeditionary in the first book, most of the principal action of the novel is set, some of it in Iowa also, where I lived. I used landscapes that I knew, but Texas saves the world, okay? Philadelphia holds on the longest, but Texas saves the world. And some of that was because it was the landscape that I knew, and some of it was the fact that I think that, honestly, if the world were to end, I think that there are certain Texas qualities that would be enormously useful under those circumstances. A certain kind of self-reliance. Let's face it, the people in Connecticut are done for, okay? Right? They're just done for in the first 5 minutes, right? But having lived in Texas long enough to kind of appreciate what's good about the place, and I really like Texas, and they're going to carry me out of there in a bag someday, I think. There is a kind of code of self-reliance that I think would be enormously useful. It's also extremely well armed, and that would definitely come in handy. So all the Texas landscapes, all the locations there, every distance, it's all totally real. I really adhered to the Texas geography, and my Texas audience just loves this, to be perfectly honest. I just was in San Antonio. I always tour a lot in Texas, and everybody is just, Texas right now is kind of having a tough time in terms of the national attitude, and I give some pro-Texas in the books. Yeah, don't make fun, Pidge. Okay, that's not nice. That's my children's home state. Right here. Wretched, yeah, I did make a joke about New Jersey, didn't I? Yes. Yes, wretched New Jersey. I got to say that was kind of a fun joke to tell. Yeah.
Since the trilogy unfolds on such a vast scope and a great span of time, moving backwards and forwards, I'm curious how much you had plotted out when you began the first book.
A lot. The first book had a very complete plan before I wrote a sentence. I had about a 30-page battle plan, right, so that I understood not just the characters and the settings and so on, but the actual physical logistics. A novel is got two parts of the brain making it, and there's the part that's, the imagination, for lack of a better term, where you come up with a story and who knows where that comes from. But then there's the logistics of a novel, particularly one that's very complicated, that has many, many, many characters, a lot of time, a lot of motion through space, and the need to make things converge, right? Because here's the sort of English professor, writing teacher, nerd thing, is that novels are basically all about convergences, getting everybody, in a sense, in the same room at the same time, somewhere near the end, and also getting the past and the present in the same room, somewhere near the end. So basically, it's all about moving things to a single point. I could not write a book and have that happen unless I knew what the convergence point was. So I wrote the first book with a very complete plan. And by the way, within that shape, there's a lot of room to play jazz. Okay, there's lots of stuff you have to work out along the way. There's mistakes you've made in logistics that you have to kind of backtrack and think about, how am I going to make that actually work? And then there's just room to move. There's just a lot of room to move. But you know where you're going. And so I wrote the first book with a very specific plan, with then a good summary of books 2 and 3. I knew their principal dramatic motions and goals. And then when I got to the second book, I did another plan. And then when I got to the third book, I did another plan. And I will write every book I ever write this way, because here's what it means. It means that the first sentence of the book actually can contain the whole story. Every sentence in the novel knows the story. And that creates a sense of authority, which means I can try the reader's patience more, because they feel that the story knows itself. And so when you do something like jump ahead 100 years, right? You have to earn the reader's trust to get away with stuff like that. They have to be willing to say, I trust this guy. I know this is going to add up, right? And I made that request of the readers many, many times. And so the only way I could earn that would be if I indeed knew where I was going and nothing was arbitrary. I knew the last sentence of the third book in July 2007. Right? Not what happened. I mean the last sentence. I knew it in words, because books just made of words. So I need to know the actual words. And it dropped into my head in a parking lot in Hyannis, Massachusetts. I was buying groceries, and I knew what it was. I was like, okay. And that was the light, that was Daisy's green light at the end of the dock for the whole project. I always knew it was endable, and I knew where it was going. So when you get up in the morning and you're writing a 3,500-page saga with hundreds and hundreds of characters, and if you thought of it that way, your head would fly off. But if I knew that it was actually endable and that it had a goal, I could, get up every morning and cheerfully do my job for, whatever section of the book I was in, because I would be able to look at it and say, okay, these are the goals for this part of the book, and I'm going to meet the goals, and then I'm going to pick my son up and take him to a tennis lesson.
Could you talk about that moment where there was life before, and then there's a moment where the story, the idea for the story happened, like it's kind of a Schrodinger's cat moment, like suddenly everything had changed. What was the moment that you decided to write this book, or got the seed of this story?
Well, it happened gradually, because it wasn't supposed to happen at all. I was writing another novel that I did not feel was going especially well, and I was in a bad mood. It was 2005, fall of 2005. And a number of things were going on. First of all, the Iraq and Afghani wars had turned into a total quagmire, a complete mess. And we'd just gone through a very nasty election. And Hurricane Katrina had just drowned New Orleans, demonstrating the complete incompetence of government. Several weeks after that, a Category 5 hurricane named Hurricane Rita, which nobody remembers unless you're from Texas, was headed straight for Houston. And it ended up not hitting Houston. It ended up veering north and hitting a less populated part of the Louisiana coastline. But I was part of the largest urban evacuation in recorded human history. 4 million people trying to get out of Houston in advance of this storm. There are basically only 4 roads out of Houston. and it was a total catastrophe. Nobody could go anywhere. Everybody ran out of gas. It was about 105 degrees. People were sleeping on the road by their cars. We were completely out of the reach of any emergency services. I mean, it was a memorable night. And my wife and I, we'd made it all of 50 miles. We had a house in Austin we were going to go hide in. And we jumped the median and went home, and the storm missed. That's part of what was on my mind. I mean, oddly enough, Houston behaved extraordinarily well. I mean, there really wasn't much in the way of disorder, apart from, the disorder of people all being trapped on a highway, but in terms of, there was no looting or anything like that. I mean, people behaved extremely well. But it was a very disquieting experience. Then most people know the story. Actually, that's incredibly egotistical. A lot of people know the story about how my daughter suggested that I write this. Right, my daughter was 9 years old, and she was concerned that my other books were boring, and so I challenged her to a game where for an hour every day after school that fall, I would go running, and she'd come with me on her bicycle, and this is the little girl you remember so well, right? Total smartass. And she'd sort of dared me to do this, and we composed a story together with the rules that everything had to be interesting. It had to have one character with red hair, and it had to have a girl who saves the world in it. Those were the 3 rules. And that's where the story actually came from, was from this time spent with my daughter. I had no intention of writing the thing at all. But when I did start it, just for laughs, it kind of caught fire. I wrote it in my spare time, basically, for about a year. And I'll give you the moment. Here's the moment. The moment happened when I realized that I had not been writing my other book at all for quite some time. There was a deadline on it, and I had already spent the advance. And what I had was this other book, right, which I'd been writing in secret. And I asked my wife, what should I do? My publisher's not going to want this at all. This is not the kind of thing they do. We're going to have to, this is a big risk. And she said, well, can they get the house? And I said, I don't know, that's a good question. And I called my accountant and I said, if I don't return that advance, can they get the house? And they said, no, because of Texas homestead laws, your house is protected. All right? The Texas homestead laws are designed to keep men from gambling away the family house at the poker table. So my wife said, go ahead. That's the story, pretty much. I'd written a couple hundred pages, and then I sold it when I'd written about 400 manuscript pages. The final manuscript count was 1250 of the first book, so it was about a third, and I sold it as a trilogy. So there you go. Practical considerations, right? It's not all art. Sometimes it's just commerce.
Right. 2 questions. Mm-hmm. Is Katie based on your daughter?
Who?
Sarah's daughter.
Oh, Kate? No.
Kate.
No. Well, I mean, every kid in the book is in some ways based upon my experience of parenting. I'll give you that. I mean, the Wolgast-Amy relationship, I'm not Wolgast. Wolgast's right here in the 4th row, okay? Right? And Amy's not my daughter, but their affection is of course comes from my relationship to my daughter. And were the world to end, and my daughter, even now at age 20, were we to get sort of trapped in a lodge in Oregon for a couple years with nothing but books and board games, I think we'd be completely happy, right? I think we'd have a great time. And maybe she wouldn't, but, I would. So that's question 1.
And the second question,
yeah.
You sound very structured how you write. And I know a lot of writers indicate that their characters do a lot of dictating
right.
as they unfold.
Mm-hmm.
Was there any point where the characters kind of pressured you to go in a different direction in regards to how you structured the story?
No. They're characters, which means they have a certain kind of ability to declaim themselves, but they are also extensions of my will, right? And when I figure out where the story's going to go, I'm doing that because I know who the people are. I don't just say, okay, here's the story, and then I'm going to march these individuals through it, because character and plot are actually the same thing, because it's enacted by the people in the story. So I'm not one of those writers who tries to discover the novel by writing the novel. I had this conversation today with somebody. It was an interview I was having on NPR or something. I don't remember. But the interviewer said, I'm forgiving of this fact, but about a quarter, she said, most of the novels that I read, the last quarter kind of doesn't work, right? The book doesn't end well. And she says, I'm willing to forgive that. It's fine. I enjoyed the first 3 quarters enormously, but a lot of books fall apart at the end. And I think it's because the writer doesn't really know, doesn't have that green light at the end of the dock, to be honest. And when I read books, I can always kind of see the wires. It's just professional. It's just it's what I do for a living, so I'm pretty aware of what's happening at the level of the creative level. So, I think that happens to a lot of writers. So I'm very careful to plan it in advance, but it's not just simply a mechanical structure or plot. It's, planning who the characters are, what's on their minds. I interrogate them pretty thoroughly. And the one thing I know about all my characters is their backstory before I start, and in a very specific aspect of their backstory, which is this. I ask every character, what is the thing you don't talk about? Right? What's the stone around your neck? What's the secret that you have? What's the thing that's always present, even though it's not discussed? Right? And everybody in this room's got one. Just like real people. My characters have one. And so, you can go case for case in the book and see, that what it is. For Peter, it's that misunderstood conversation with his mother. Taking care of her while she was dying is really that's his stone. That's the stone around his neck, and his misunderstanding of Theo and so on. And then for Amy, it's Wolgast. That's pretty obvious. For Michael and Sarah, it's their parents, right? And it's actually a shared stone. In the 3rd book, it says something like, there was a room in which only the 2 of them resided. Right, and that's the room of their parents' suicide. So if you know that about your characters, then they become real people. And then you figure out where's the story going to take them? What narrative are they going to drive? In a sense, Fanning's narrative is all about his stone. That's Fanning's stone, is what happened with Liz. So.
Are you and your daughter exercising together these days, which is another way of saying what's next?
My daughter has a very complicated and interesting life as a freshman in college, so we don't exercise together very much. She lives in a different state. However, I'm working on something. I can't really discuss it at this point, but I can say a little bit about how I came to it. The reason I can't discuss it is I haven't told my agent and I haven't told my publisher. I've just made them all kind of they keep asking. I'm like, I'll let you know. Well, because I'm trying to work it out with the kind of completeness that I need. If I'm going to make a promise, I want to make sure I have the story, and I want to write a certain number of pages, and I need to know how it ends. I actually do know how it ends, but I have to figure out some of the aspects of the dramatic movement. What happened is, for the last 10 years, I've been writing one story. And so while you're writing one story, occasionally other ideas just come into your head. You're driving your car, or you're taking a shower, or you're walking around the block, and all of a sudden you think, how about a novel about X or Y? And you write it down in your cool idea book, right? And so over 10 years, these pile up, right? And when I was done finally with the City of Mirrors, which I was really done with it last summer almost. That was when the manuscript was accepted. Excuse me. I went back to my cool idea book, imagining that I would select from this book of cool ideas. And they are indeed very cool, right? But they're not what's bugging me now, right? And I always used to tell my students, write about what is eating you. Like, what is on your mind? What are the pressing matters of your life now? Because that's the thing you're thinking about all the time. So your energy as a writer will naturally flow into that. If you try to write about something else, it won't work. And so sometime last summer, I had this other idea that was starting to eat at me, and that's what I'm trying to develop into another story. And time goes by, right? I started the Passage Trilogy when I was in my early 40s. I'm turning 44, 54 now. 54. Sorry, I don't want to. Yeah, 54. And in the meantime, for instance, I'm an empty nester, or I'm half an empty nester. My daughter's gone, my son is still around, but he's a boy, and they just vanish. And when they're teenagers, they're like collapsing stars. Different things are on my mind. I don't know if you noticed, but the City of Mirrors is an empty nester novel, right? They've all caught up to my age. Their kids are leaving them. They're wondering about what comes next. They sort of worn out their jobs, all that stuff that happens when you're at that age. So
my question was sort of an offshoot of the character thing you just had. My favorite books in the world, the characters stay with me. I'm convinced they're still walking around somewhere. Like with The Stand, I feel like it calls Stu and Franny, be like, how's the baby? And I was just wondering, I mean, has there, at the risk of doing a spoiler, has there been, in these 3 books, which character was the hardest to, if not kill, just let go of when you were finished?
Yeah, that does kind of run into spoilerish territory. So I have to be careful with the 3rd book, right? Because, you know, the fate of many characters is determined in the 3rd book. I'll just enlarge the question a little bit, because when I'm done with all 3 books, then, of course, I have to let them all go, right? And it's interesting, you know, people have asked me often, like, which character was the hardest to say goodbye to, right? And it sort of changes almost day to day, and I realize that's because when I'm writing a character, I'm really trying to emotionally occupy them completely. And now that I've been able to step back a little bit, I sort of see them in groups. And, you know, today my answer would be Michael and Alicia, because they're the 2 characters who give absolutely everything for this project. They get nothing else in their life. They're the ones who make the biggest sacrifices. You know, and it's sort of brain and bronze kind of thing, right? And they're the 2 who've never had any other project. That's it. That's all they've ever done. Everybody else got something else. They never got anything else. So that's my answer today. But, you know, yesterday I was thinking a lot about Lucius Greer, who was a character I just love. And he was a kind of late comer into the story, but he's, you know, the soldier turned mystic. And I love his transformation, and I love his absolute fidelity to the ideas that he has. And he could be the craziest man in the world. I mean, you get to decide. But I like his stalwartness. Like he's like a totally loyal and reliable guy. And so it moves around, you know, you know, Amy obviously is, you know, a character that I have a very kind of deep and profound relationship to, and it is her story. So it kind of moves around. You know, I love Sarah. Sarah's the one who's most like my wife. My wife is convinced that Sarah is her, and it's true. They kind of look alike, and they like horses, and, you know, I did borrow a lot. So there really is no one answer to it. As for killing characters, that is hard. I kill a lot of them, right? It's not a nice world, and if some of them didn't die, I would be telling a lie. So every time I do it, and I know I'm going to do it, I know it's coming, it sucks, right? And, you know, I choke myself up at the typewriter, right? Which is the height of vanity, choking yourself up, I must tell you, right? So beautiful.
So my question is, you said when you started this, it took off like a fire. And with respects to your other works, do you think that this is kind of more the road you're going to continue down in the future? Or do you think you'll keep yourself an open book to all different?
Well, I always just ask the book that wants, you know, I write the book that asks me to write it, pretty much. However, that said, I really liked writing a story that had a lot of propulsive energy. My publicist was appalled when, in an interview with the Wall Street Journal, I said, I am a plot slut, right? But I am, right? I like a good plot. And I like plots that take individual people and put them in circumstances that have large public consequences. Right? In other words, there's something going on in the background that's enormous and important, and then you have ordinary folks, you know, their spouses, parents, whatever, they have jobs, they perform the ordinary duties of life, but they have enormous ramifications for everybody. And those are my favorite stories. So I'm going to go on working with big canvases of plot, I believe. I mean, my wife has made me promise I'm not going to write books as long. And because she thinks it's going to kill me, and she's probably right. But I do want to work with robust stories. In what genre? That one I'm going to keep to my chest. I mean, I actually have a kind of checklist of stories I loved, the categories of stories I loved growing up when I was first reading fiction. One of them was apocalyptic fiction, so I just did that. There are others on that list, and I think I'm going to go to that list and, you know, work with those kinds of stories, because I have a natural attraction for them. And, if you're a writer, what you should do is write what you want and, write the hell out of it. Right? Write what you want and write the hell out of it. That is the last question. Thank you all for being here. Every copy of The City of Mirrors that you buys my daughter 6 more minutes of college. So I want to thank you all very much for that.